go over a few things about the system just really quickly so that everybody can get acclimated, and then we'll get right into the program. So our agenda today consists of the presenters giving some opening reflections about the state of the immigrant rights movement and reflections on their own work and how they come to the movement. After that, we'll have some strategic questions for each presenter, and they'll be dialoguing back and forth about those questions. And then after that, we're going to open up Q&A to the rest of the audience. For the time being, right now, we're in what's called listen-only mode. That means that only presenters can mute and unmute themselves during the conversation. And once we get to the question and answer mode, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question and to engage the presenters directly. I would ask that when we get to that point in the conversation that you just keep in mind three things. First and foremost, please share your first name and where you're calling from. Try to keep your question brief so that we can get more questions in, and especially now that we've lost a little bit of time. And then last but not least, after you've asked your question, just put yourself on mute so we don't get an echo or any feedback during the conversation. So those are the basic instructions for today. As you can see, there's a chat box on the left-hand side. Feel free to have whatever conversation you want to have. You get excited about something a presenter's talking about, or you want to ask a question later. You'll be able to ask a question also via chat. If you're joining us only by phone, once we get to Q&A mode, you'll be able to hit *5 and unmute yourself. So those are the basic instructions. So the Move to End Violence, some of you might not be familiar with who they are. The Move to End Violence is a 10-year initiative of the Novo Foundation, and that initiative is geared toward and designed to strengthen leaders, organizations, and ultimately the movement that is working to end violence against women and girls in the United States. And the Move to End Violence initiative is currently working and engaged with leaders around the country, many of whom are on the call today, who are exploring questions of social change and really thinking about how to build this movement. And we do that in part by exchanging across multiple movements, trying to exchange ideas, trying to exchange new ways of being and new stories of social change that really can bring a richness to the conversation. We have three amazing presenters today, some of who I know a very long time and some of who I've got to know just in the last few weeks. And I'm really excited about them. And my introduction of them really doesn't do them justice because it's just a short sliver of all the amazing things that they do in their everyday work as they try to build out and expand the immigrant rights movement. First, we have Ana Avendaño. In the green sweater, for those that are wondering who that is. She's the Assistant to the President and Director of Immigration and Community Action at the AFL-CIO. And in that capacity, she oversees efforts to broaden the labor movement through innovative labor community partnerships and by connecting to Latinos and immigrant communities. She also advises national and local union leaders on domestic and international immigration policy and other matters that impact immigrant workers. Welcome, Ana. And then we have Pramila Jayapal, who's the co-chair of We Belong Together. Many have seen in the news recently. And We Belong Together is a national campaign to engage women in immigration reform. And she's a leading national advocate for immigrant civil and human rights. Pramila is also the founder of One America, Washington State's largest immigrant advocacy organization, where she served as executive director for almost 11 years and became known for its strong voice and successful efforts in fighting discrimination and advancing local and national immigration policies. And last but not least, we have Gaby Pacheco here on the bottom, the beautiful white headset. She's the executive director of the Bridge Project. The Bridge Project seeks to connect individuals from across the political spectrum for the purpose of achieving immigration reform that is sensible and workable. And I'm sure she's going to have some exciting stories to share with us today about going across the political spectrum. Gaby is also an undocumented American and an immigrant rights leader from Miami, Florida, and she is one of the 4 youth leaders, for those of you that remember the Trail of Dreams, who walked 1,500 miles from Miami to Washington, D.C., to really talk to President Obama about, keeping families together, stopping deportations, etc. So welcome to the 3 of you. We're so excited to have you today with us and join us and really share your insights and reflections on the state of the movement. I'd really like to start with opening reflections to really set the stage and the context for where we are in the immigrant rights movement, how you came to the immigrant rights movement, and really highlighting some transformative work in your life that illustrates the need for immigration reform and how you apply that to the strategy each and every day. So we're going to start with Ana, and then we're going to go over to Gaby, and then over to Pramila. So Ana, take it away.
Hi. Thanks for joining us, and I'm so happy to be here with you today and all of these amazing women. I know that we're running a little late in getting started, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks really, really short and just talk to you a little bit about what brought me to this work and where I think we are in this moment today. I've been in the immigrant rights movement and the labor movement actually for a long time, more than 2 decades now. But I think that I just want to share with you how I got started, because it's really what I'm going to tell you is a story that could be retold today. When I was in law school many moons ago, I was working for a union where we were doing a wage and hour campaign. Workers weren't being paid their wages. Sound familiar? And so I was helping the lawyers basically take affidavits, janitors. And as I was helping with the affidavits, I would meet people who lived in D.C., had been living here for a really long time, but didn't have immigration status, were out of status for some reason. At the same time, I was also volunteering at night at Garesen, which is the Central American Refugee Center, helping with doing political asylum applications. And I would meet the same people that I met in the daytime at night, but they were trying to get their work authorization and immigration status fixed through the political asylum process. And I'm not talking about people who are sort of the same, doing the same type of work, but literally the same person, who in the morning, her name was Margarita, and at night, her name was actually Ana Rosa, for example. This is a real person. And what I really came to see very early on was that workers had an identity as workers with one identity that had been given to them, or that had been forced upon them. And that their identity as human beings, as members of our communities, as immigrants, and also as workers, were based on an identity that they couldn't share with most of the world by virtue of being undocumented. And that these two identities really needed to be one, because there are some of us, like myself, who am an immigrant to the United States and to Canada. I had the luck of having parents who were able to get papers just by virtue of where we are in life. And I could exercise my identity as an immigrant and as a worker, but many people didn't have that. So I became fascinated by the intersection of immigrant rights and worker rights and these issues of identity, and I've been working in this field ever since. And it's 20 years later, and we could still have the same conversation where workers really don't have any way of being a whole person right now, of being able to go to the job, to exercise what many of us just take for granted, because their identity is subsumed and really has been taken away by this immigration system that, I don't want to use the term again, but it's just so out of whack, dysfunctional, that is denying people fundamental human rights, worker rights, and just the basic ability to live just a normal, fruitful life every day.
Thank you. Gaby, do you want to jump in here?
Gaby?
Gabriela?
Yes.
Do you want to jump in here?
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you had said.
That's okay.
like Anna said, it's great to be with all of you. All of you are very courageous and very inspiring women, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all today. And so I came to the United States from Ecuador at age 8, and one of the biggest reasons why my family decided to move to the United States is because of the violence that they were seeing in Ecuador. I remember seeing my father carrying 2 guns, one on each side of his leg. My mom would carry a little small handgun in her purse. And that was very common and normal for us, to see people being robbed, to see people being hurt. And when my parents would come to the United States for vacations, they would see a different world, and they wanted that different world for their children. And so they make that trek, and they came to the United States. And for many, many years, I think I was sheltered, right, from the realities of the fact that as undocumented people, although we flee violence from our own home countries, we end up finding ourselves in other forms of violence. And one of the reasons why I'm here is not just because of my own personal story and the story of my family and the struggles that we've had, but because I've met along the way many, many people in their own ways, just victims of violence, from women that have been victims of human trafficking and are currently, living a really horrible life. I remember I think it was 2005, my sister and I had to take a trip on the Greyhound because she didn't have a license and she couldn't get on a plane to go to New York for her cousin's 16th birthday. And so on our way back, we knew who had crossed the border and was with her small child. And we could see that they were hungry. We could had gone to we realized in order for her to survive, in order to pay off her job that was down in home, she had to prostitute herself. What really broke our heart was, 18, 19 years old, realizing that undocumented go through a lot of violence. And, my debt to my community and to my parents has been to fight to ensure that we're able to find ways that people have rights and people have abilities to flee these dangerous things that happen not just in our home countries but in every place that there is bad people and that there is violence.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I feel like I've been getting so much inspiration from being completely with women over the last many months, and this feels like another opportunity to be with incredible women, the speakers on the call, and everybody that's on the phone, so thank you for including me. My story is I'm an immigrant from India. I came to the United States when I was 16 by myself, and it took me almost 18 or 19 years to get my citizenship. But in that time, I have been working in social justice for almost 23 years now. The first half of that was actually international. And so I come to this work from the perspective of global women's health, global women's work, and really how we create kind of a global solidarity for women and for workers. And so I started doing domestic work in 2001, right after 9/11, and I wasn't intending to start an organization, but there were so many, mostly Arabs, Muslims, and South Asians who were being detained and deported right after 9/11 when there were 1,200 Arabs who were picked up and questioned. And in the course of stepping up to defend those folks, I realized that we had this whole system of injustice against all immigrants in the United States, and it really almost didn't matter where you were from. There were serious injustices happening, and we had undocumented immigrants, we had, Arabs who were being detained, we had Muslims who were being discriminated against. And so a lot of our work in Washington State was around really highlighting deportations and detentions for everybody, building the links between different groups. And then in 2003, starting to work, we have a very strong labor movement here, so starting to work with the labor movement around the Immigrant Workers' Freedom Ride, and really getting to see a whole nother piece of all of the work that we have to do. And so that has been, I think, a wonderful part of the work that I'm doing now, is being able to really, in the We Belong Together campaign, being able to pull together a lot of different fields, you know, people who are working in domestic violence and sexual assault for immigrants, people who are working with domestic workers who are undocumented and non-citizens, people who are women who are, I think, really bear the brunt of so much of a failed immigration system, which before the campaign, I'm not sure that people totally understood all the ways in which our immigration policy discriminates against women. And so a lot of our work has been both to do the analysis and then also to build the solidarity for us as women to say, you know, we come together. Women do not think in silos. I just don't believe that we think in silos. You know, we raise families, we work, we do everything all at once. And so all of those things need to be addressed. And I think the transformative moment I'll just lift up from, I've had so many, been so fortunate to have so many, but most recently when 105 women from 26 states, different ethnicities, different races, 22 undocumented women took that intersection in front of the House of Representatives and blocked all 4 of the streets and just sat and chanted. And I watched a 76-year-old grandmother from Minnesota chanting. She couldn't speak any English, and so she was chanting Si Se Puede, and then she heard people saying, yes, we can. And so you could just starting to mouth, yes, we can, you know, and then she started chanting, yes, we can, and pounding her hands on her legs. And I think it was just this incredible show of strength, solidarity from women leaders who have been in the trenches with undocumented women themselves, and then women leaders who lead organizations in the labor movement, women's organizations like Terry O'Neill, the president of NOW, was with us. Really an opportunity to show how we as women can transform not just the immigration debate, but all public policy debates, and really create the kind of society that I think only women, frankly, are really able to create.
Thank you. That's perfect. And Pramila, you know, tell us a little bit more. I want to tease that out a little bit more. You know, when we look at the immigrant rights movement and we see that, you know, women have sort of this, in some ways, unique vantage point, collective vantage point. We're very community oriented in sense of thinking about all the different ways that immigration reform could affect us, how it is that we transform society. How successful has the immigrant rights movement really been at incorporating, you know, whether it be race or gender or sexual identity or any other identity, you know, into the movement? And are there still, you know, where are we successful and where are there still areas of struggle?
Well, I think, interestingly, the immigrant rights movement has more women leaders than most of the other progressive social movements out there. You know, a lot of women who lead top immigrant rights organizations like Gaby, Ana in high positions, Angelica Salas, a lot of people who understand this gender perspective. But I'll say from my vantage point as being a woman leader of a major state-based organization, that I don't think that we all knew that women were our key constituency, but maybe we were acculturated into a male-dominated world in a way. We didn't do the gender analysis that we needed to do to make a really compelling argument that this is a women's issue. And so while I knew, because I went around every day with our undocumented immigrants, with all of our women immigrants, that the majority of our population was women and children, we had not pushed to really make this clearly a women's issue with an analysis to support it. So the talk would be, oh, women are immigrants and immigrants are women. But that's very different than saying, 60% of undocumented women work in the informal workforce, and previous immigration reform proposals would have left them out because they demanded proof of employment. It's very different than saying 27% of all immigrants who get work visas are women, only 27%. So I think that that's part of what we've been doing with the campaign, is building the base that we needed. And I also think with everything, I think Gaby and the Dreamers really had to push to make sure that young people were being included in the immigrant rights movement in a significant way. I think that Asian Americans are still pushing to make sure that they're included in the immigration movement in a significant way. And women are pushing to make sure that we're included in the policy debates and in the frame and in the actual legislation that comes through in a significant way. So those are the challenges, I think. But the opportunities for us as women leaders in our different sectors and different organizations is actually to get out of the frame of these are separate issues. To me, a woman is a worker. A worker is a woman. Women deal with sexual assault and domestic violence. Women have to deal with employment. These are all part of what we have to reframe the conversation, I think, so that it works. And I'll just quickly end with saying that at the We Belong Together campaign, that involved a couple of very specific things. One was doing the policy analysis and really having a strong gender analysis that we could start to share with statistics and data. One was making sure that we had good messages and messengers. Do you know that every poll around immigration reform that's been done in the past has used a man's voice to test the messages? And when we tested with a woman's voice, we had a 9% shift in women believing in immigration reform because it was being delivered by a messenger that they trusted who was a woman. So we have to fight back against the perception that somehow it's better or stronger or more powerful to have a men deliver those messages. And then our messages need to be more nuanced than immigrants are women and women are immigrants. We need to start pushing out the data about 3/4 of immigrants to the United States being women and children, about the ways in which immigration policy and immigration reform proposals have excluded women.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm curious if Ana and Gaby, I saw a lot of head nods, had something that they wanted to jump in on there. I think in the last few years, we've seen Dreamers really come to the forefront. And even before that, we had sort of a rising tide of undocumented workers, also come to the fore and begin speaking out. Is there something you want to add about, those two lenses, both workers and youth, right? And just young people being able to add something to the conversation. Your mic is off, Ana.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think it's really important that as we're crafting public policies, as we've been talking about, we remember that what's behind these policies are real human beings with human needs and human rights. And that as we're developing these policies, we just recognize that. Policies impact different people, different men and women differently. And it's often a forgotten piece of immigration reform on how the trend, for example, toward temporary work and temporary worker programs has a really pernicious impact on women. I don't know if folks know this, but the shift toward employers being able to import workers on guest worker programs or temporary worker programs is really part of a web of labor recruiters. So, for example, if I'm running a chicken plant in Georgia, I can really advertise for workers in Honduras, just as an example. And I can say, I am looking for workers who are men between the ages of 27 and 32 with 2 children, because that's the profile of workers who are most likely going to go back home and aren't going to stay here and sort of cause a ruckus. That's exactly what's happening. I'm not making that up. That is part of now the global network of temporary migration programs that are essentially genetically engineering workers. That has huge impact on women. Women and kids are not part of the calculus, are not part of what's, the destruction of the family and all of that. So as we're crafting domestic policies, we've been really conscious about recognizing who is going to be impacted by these policies. There's another troubling shift toward point systems, as we've seen in the Senate bill. And again, when we craft a point system, we decide what's important gets more points, what's less important gets fewer points. You'll see that the point systems that are being developed heavily favor men. So we really do need to keep the gender analysis front and center as we move forward. It's really important.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask everyone, all the presenters, just if you could raise your volume on your own mic so that the audience can hear you a little more clearly. We're having a little bit of difficulty. Gaby, talk to us a little bit about, risk-taking and the risk-taking analysis that comes with the immigrant rights movement, which has many dimensions, as we all know. And I think that in the last few years, the sort of rising tide of young people, stepping up and taking that risk, and really speaking about, what is happening here? What has it meant for the immigrant rights movement, for, immigrants, and I think young people in particular, without documentation, to speak up and come out of the shadows and advocate on their own behalf?
Yes. Well, as we've seen in history, any movement has had a moment where risks had to be taken. And, from women's rights, right, women being arrested for speaking out, to the civil rights movement, where people were actually being hurt and beaten because they refused to not leave those counters. And the immigrant rights movement has been very similar in the sense that in order for somebody to come out and tell their story, there's a high level of risk because they're practically telling the world that they are undocumented. And putting themselves at risk like that brings and opens a can of worms. And so, for instance, in my case, I started telling my story, and in 2006, immigration came after me and came to my door one early morning and detained my parents and sisters. And so, our lives are constantly at risk. And so we had to make a decision. Do we continue to live the risk of every day being detained by a police officer, by an ICE agent, by them coming to our home? Or do we just expose ourselves and start fighting in a way that people can realize and see the amount of danger that we live in, right? Our families being separated, children being left alone, being put in foster care, or do we just, fight back? And so I think the community has made a very, very conscious decision that they're going to fight back and that they're going to put that fear away. And so as Pramila was talking about, 100 women got arrested not too long ago. And among those women were 22 undocumented. And that just is a testament of where our movement is growing, the power that, speaking out and it took some young people to believe in themselves to then allow for other people to also say, I could do this too. And I think the most powerful thing is just losing that fear. And whenever the community starts speaking out and it comes from the heart, it comes from the gut, then the truth starts coming out, and then there's no stopping us. And I think that that's a great place that our community is in, where we're able to assert our rights and where we're able to speak out and say enough. The violence, the discrimination, everything that is happening has to stop. And it's not just for our families, our communities, but the country as a whole.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you highlight that there's like a real fundamental truth that comes out when people begin speaking on their own behalf. And Pramila, you and I were having a conversation on the phone, just about this, and how just even the act of civil disobedience in and of itself seems to create some sense of power, not only for of empowerment, not only for undocumented, but those who are documented as well. And I'd love for you to share that story you shared with me about Terry O'Neill.
Oh, well, I just assumed that Terry O'Neill, as the head of the president of the National Organization for Women, had been arrested. I just assumed she had, and she had not. And it was an incredibly powerful experience for her, I think, both in terms of the moment that she was participating in, the solidarity she was bringing, and the desire she has to really make sure that the women's movement in the United States is a broad and diverse movement. And I think the energy that she got from that action is one of those transformative things that will stay with her and that will ensure that she really sticks to that goal. But we also have somebody like Bertha Lewis. Now, Bertha is the president of the Black Institute. Bertha's been arrested, I don't know, maybe 100 times. But she called me after the action and just was so energized, that she hasn't felt that energized in a long time, wanted to know how we managed to do the action so perfectly, and could we put together a toolkit for how to really do these actions so well, which really was such an honor for me, because I assumed somebody like her probably had the toolkit already. And so it really, I think, was this moment where people felt so energized, inspired. And I want to lift up the courage, because the courage of the undocumented women, I think, is what gave everybody else a lot of courage and energy. But there were also a lot of people who were not undocumented, but who had never taken a risk before. And did step up. And for them, too, it was a really significant moment, and their courage needs to be honored as well. And we have somebody that we work with very closely in the sexual assault, domestic violence arena, who was nervous to do it with us, but was very supportive of everything we were doing. And afterwards she said, I think I'm going to have to get out there with you next time. I think that's really what we're looking for, is building the movement, building the energy, and building that sense of power that comes when you do a collective action in solidarity for a truly moral purpose, like Gaby said, from the heart. Then the truth comes out.
Absolutely. Within the Move to End Violence, we talk a lot about working from the heart, and we talk a lot about building, Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision for a beloved community. And, part of that calculus, or part of that analysis, has a lot to do with collaboration and partnerships. And Ana, I'd love for you to talk us through a little bit about, the labor movement, which is such a big and diverse voice within the context of the immigrant rights movement. Is there an example of a time where, you've really been able to collaborate that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise, and why that's important or valuable?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about that, but I just want to take a moment and recognize the courage of the Dream 9 and other immigrant youth who are really, really putting their lives on the line every day here. I don't know if folks know about the really courageous act of civil disobedience, where a group of undocumented youth actually crossed the border back into Mexico to really challenge, in very real terms, just how broken the system is. And they came back and applied for, they came back and were able to, within the legal system, come back into the country now and are in legal limbo. But, talk about taking risks. We just need to honor that and recognize that just takes incredible strength. In terms of movements coming together, I want to share with you an experience that we had around the policy of secured communities, which, for those who don't know, secure communities is a new policy under the Obama administration. It's really deep data sharing, so that when somebody gets stopped now, their data is run through various computers and undocumented status comes up, or an immigration hit comes up on folks, and people end up being arrested. And this has a huge impact on women. We have numerous cases of where victims of domestic violence, by virtue of reporting a crime, found themselves in this maze of databases, found themselves arrested. Victims of secure communities. Has a terrible impact on workers as well, because employers, all they do is have to call the police or ICE, and ICE will actually show up. People are run through ESCOM, and then employers are able to deport away their problems. So it's just a very problematic policy and enforcement in general. The National Day Labor Organizing Network for years has been leading the fight against secure communities, using all of the advocacy tools of litigation and mostly just really deep grassroots work. And through the way that they've used these tools, but a lot of grassroots activism, we're able to get cities to pull out of this federal program, and states. And they really, really forced the federal government to sit up and take notice and say, hey, wait a minute, what is happening with secure communities? Why is New York opting out of secure communities? Why is Washington, D.C. opting out of secure communities? And that happened by virtue of the ties that they have to local communities, to the media, to other groups, and their willingness and ability to be nimble, to be loud, and to get in people's faces, and to just really follow this pattern of this social movement approach to the problem. So when they caused enough of a ruckus around secured communities, the federal government woke up and said, hey, we need to do something about this. We're going to establish a task force, which is what the federal government always does. So they set up a secure communities task force. And sure, then that shifted back to inside the Beltway politics, and, you know, the established DC-based groups were invited to be on the task force, and we had the Secure Communities Task Force. And our organization, AFL-CIO, was one of those organizations. But we approached the task force really through our partnership with Endalon that we've had since 2006 now. And we made it clear to the task force that we're there not just on behalf of our members, but on behalf of all working people, and that we were going to push for a policy that really benefited all workers, not just institutional concerns. The task force functioned for a while, and then it basically started to fall apart because, for just reasons that we don't have time to get into now, but what was really interesting was we had conversations with Endalon all the time and made sure that day labor voices and other low-wage worker voices were represented on the task force. We eventually walked out of the process in protest, in large part because the concerns that we had articulated on behalf of our partners weren't addressed. And ICE was not happy about that. DHS was not happy about that because it's unusual to have a big, large, inside the Beltway organization actually buck the system by virtue of not having addressed concerns inside the Beltway. And we were able to control that process so that it didn't just rubber stamp a report that was coming out of this task force validating secure communities, that hasn't happened. But none of that could have happened unless we'd worked together, because it was Endalon who created the energy, the consciousness raising, and the ability of the government to say, okay, what's happening here? And then it was the institutional power that the labor movement has, politics, et cetera, that really helped raise that voice within the policy sphere that otherwise day laborers wouldn't have a presence. So I think those are the best examples I can share.
Absolutely. All right. I have like 9 million questions that I could ask you, but I think it's time for us to open it up to the larger audience. So I'm going to switch us over to
all attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So now if you have a question that you'd really like to ask, I want to invite you to do so. You can do it via chat or you can unmute yourself. If you're using the computer, just hit the mic button, and if you're on the phone, hit *5. I know you're burning with questions.
Hi, I have a question. This is Anna from Berkeley, California.
Hi, Anna. Go ahead.
Hi. As most of you probably know, Janet Napolitano is now the president of the UC system, and she'll be doing a tour of the UCs in the next couple months. And I was wondering, some of us are going to have the opportunity to talk to her, and she hasn't always been a friend of immigration. If you could ask Janet a question about her new role as the UC president, University of California president, what would you ask her?
Anyone want to take that?
I think I would say, how do you think you can succeed as the head of the UC system when young people who want to go to college are getting deported all the time or having their parents deported all the time? There is no way for them to fully have the experience they should have unless we have a system that stops deportations. And since you were responsible for so many of those deportations, what do you plan to do as the head of the UC system to ensure that these young people who have such bright futures and such potential can really exercise all of that potential? And then I'd love to hear what you said.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, Anna from Berkeley, please share that on the Move to End Violence website. We want to hear too. Other questions?
Yes, hello. This is Rosie Hidalgo. I'm with Casa de Esperanza, the National Latino Network for Healthy Families and Communities. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Rosie.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this dialogue today. And one of the things I wanted to highlight is since October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it seems like it would be a great opportunity for us to highlight the intersections on why comprehensive immigration reform is so critical as for the DV movement, and how having millions of undocumented women really makes them extremely vulnerable to abuse, sexual abuse, rape in the fields, and exploitation, as we all know, that makes it very difficult for them to seek safety and self-sufficiency. So I did want to just let people know that we are planning a briefing on Capitol Hill for October 16th for Domestic Violence Awareness Month to talk about the need for immigration reform. And just also want to ask our presenters what other ideas they have on ways that we can use this month to really highlight these intersections.
Right.
Well, I think what you're doing is fabulous. I'm really looking forward to that briefing because I think it's just an important opportunity to lift up the intersections, as you said. I think one of the things that would be really great is to see if we could do echo events around, around the country. We're thinking that the week of October 14th will be another week of action for women in immigration, and it just seems like the perfect opportunity for DV groups, sexual assault groups, women's groups across the country to really lift up what you're doing by really making it a point of concern in their districts, and particularly with everybody, but particularly with Republicans. There actually are a lot of Republicans who are not great on immigration but have been really pretty good on women's issues. So we have an analysis of that, and it's worth really thinking about places where the domestic violence and sexual assault movement may be our strongest messengers to some people who aren't with us yet.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions? Now there's a short delay from people unmuting themselves. In the meantime, I have a question, which is really about strategy around the masses. Marketers are always talking about total market strategy and how to reach massive audiences, and I think we think about that as we're thinking about getting out the right, turning people out to vote. How do you think about sort of a mass strategy as it relates to messaging around the immigrant rights movement and key issues, some of which are really difficult to talk to the broader American public?
We had a little bit of conversation, and Anna touched on this, and the importance of partnerships. And I think that that's one of the things that we really have to get better at, because, even though Pramila talked about how women don't really get into silos, sometimes I feel in the broader immigrant rights movement, we do kind of do that. And ensuring that, and I've been seeing in the last couple of years, and even in the last couple of months, a very, very good effort in trying to include other people who are not, for instance, immigrants. And in broadening the immigrant rights issue to be something that it's about human rights, that it's about the country, and it's about the laws and how we're corroding the laws by making these legislations that actually don't help, but promote, like Anna was saying, just a system that says we as human beings are just a commodity for this country. And so I think it's really important that we reach out to a broader sense of community. And I think that one of the things that I realized when we were going through the markup period in the Senate was that the domestic violence group were really, really critical in the way we were shaping legislation, especially on the criminal components and parts. And so there was a moment where Senator Cornyn from Texas was trying to use domestic violence and domestic violent groups to broaden criminalities and crimes to include a lot of people, and that it was actually going to hurt. And I think, him, for instance, having the backing of domestic violence groups was really important to move his issue forward. But at the same time, there was not a lot of conversation that happened with the domestic violence groups and immigrant rights groups. So I think, we need to really be more thinking outside of the box, reaching out to all types of communities. And, the work that we've been doing at the Birch Rock is really engaging Republicans and Republican members and Republican constituents to realize that the way they've been approaching immigration reform has been kind of the wrong way, and a way that, we're not looking, and they look at us like this amnesty, right? But in reality, they got to look at it as how are we approaching immigration laws to ensure that in 100 years and 200 years we can look back and say, wow, we can't believe we had those laws, and we can't believe we did that to our immigrants, our community that help us and help our economy, help our country, and really are right now victims of a system that is hurting us.
Absolutely. Other thoughts on reaching the broader audiences?
This is Marilyn. I'm in Maine. I have a very simple question, or maybe it's a suggestion. And I think that we are all immigrants, except for the native people, the first people who are in this country. We are all immigrants.
Thank you.
I wanted to, Gloria Steinem, who's a great friend and mentor, likes to say that her slogan is America, nation of illegal immigrants since 1492. So I got her this shirt that I can show it to you here. Oh, I don't know where it says
part of it.
It says Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492. I think that, one of the things that we do have to think about is how we make the debate as inclusive as possible. And the more we reference in our language the diversity of people who are affected by the lack of immigration reform, by the lack of human rights, the more we make the connection to different communities and make sure that we're talking about everybody, Latinos, Asians, Africans, African Americans, because the thing is, people don't just look at it as an issue of self, but they do sometimes use that as an entry point. And once they enter through that portal, then they're able to see that, the reality of an injustice to one is an injustice to all. But we have to make our language inclusive enough, and we have to recognize the real desire and moral courage of everybody in the movement in order for people to really feel like they can come forward. And honestly, I think we have more work to do on that to really make it something that is inclusive of everyone and to kind of have a space for people to stand with us even if they're not immigrants, and to really be champions of our cause even if we still have immigrants who are the leaders.
Absolutely.
And women I just wanted to say women can take a picture of themselves with a fedora and join our Fedoras for campaign, which is another way to include every woman around the country in the fight for immigration reform.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, our time is up. It went really, really, really fast, and I have a long list of chat questions, some of which I'll try to get feedback individually from the presenters and send along to some of the advocates who are on the call who still have more questions. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to our presenters who are amazing, and we could probably talk about this the entire day and it still wouldn't be enough. And I hope that they've highlighted, and I know I feel that it's been highlighted for me how important cross work, cross movement building is, and how we can stay connected. The last thing I want to share with you is that we did record this session. So if you know someone who couldn't make it today and wants to hear it, it will be available on the Move to End Violence website. That's movetoendviolence.org. And we want to encourage you and invite you to stay connected and to talk about these issues in your community. We're in a vital and critical period in the conversation on immigration reform, and more voices and more conversations and more stories are certainly going to only help and strengthen the possibility for an immigration reform that we can all be a part of and take advantage of. So thank you again to everyone, and we'll see you at the next Fireside Chat. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.